It's late. The arena lights are low. The crowd is gone. And the noise that usually fills this place has finally settled. Tonight isn't about highlights. It's not about debates or arguments about eras. This is about the players you remember, but don't hear talked about anymore. Names that once lived in box scores. Names that showed up night after night, without asking for attention. Some of these players were stars, some were leaders, and some were just quietly better than history remembers. If you enjoy calm basketball stories like this, you can like the video and subscribe to the channel. No rush, no pressure. Just so these stories can keep finding their way back. They didn't all have farewell tours. They didn't all get documentaries. But they mattered. They played in an NBA that moved a little slower, where physicality meant something, and consistency wasn't flashy. It was respected. Tonight, we're going to revisit those careers, calmly, honestly, without rushing the moment. There's no need to stay awake, no need to keep score. Just listen, and let the stories play out. This is Factletics, forgotten NBA players who were way better than you remember. Coming in at number 1, none other than Mr. ISO Joe himself. There was a time in the NBA where if the game got tight late and your team needed a clean bucket, there was a very real chance the ball was going to end up in Joe Johnson's hands. And if you watched basketball back then, you know exactly why. Joe Johnson was never loud, never theatrical, never one of those players who built his identity around highlight culture or constant attention. But he was one of the smoothest, most dependable scorers of his era. And the wild part is, because he made it all look so normal, people almost forgot how good he really was. Joe came into the league in 2001, during a time when the NBA still felt heavy. The game was more physical. Possessions meant more. The floor wasn't spaced like it is today, and you had to work for almost every clean look you got. That kind of environment tends to expose players who don't really have skill. But Joe Johnson had skill, real skill. He had size for a guard, strength, balance, patience, and one of the most controlled offensive games in the league. He didn't need to blow by you to beat you. He didn't need to jump over you. He could get to his spot, rise up calmly, and make you feel like the possession was over before it even fully started. And over time, that style became his identity. That's why he earned the nickname ISO Joe, because when everything got messy, when the play broke down, when the shot clock got low, Joe Johnson was the kind of player you trusted to figure it out. That's not a small thing. There are a lot of players who can score in rhythm. There are a lot of players who look good when the offense is flowing and everything is set up nicely around them. But being the guy who can still create when there's nothing there, that's a different level of trust. And Joe had that trust. By the mid-2000s, especially in Atlanta, he became one of the most consistent scorers in basketball, even racked up 7 straight All-Star appearances in that time. Yeah, that boy was balling. And that's where the conversation gets interesting, because 7 straight All-Star selections should make you impossible to forget. That kind of resume should keep your name in rotation forever. But Joe Johnson is one of those players whose greatness got softened by time. Part of that was market. He spent his prime in Atlanta. A good team, a playoff team, but not a franchise that controlled the NBA conversation. They weren't winning titles. They weren't dominating media cycles. They weren't the center of the league's attention. And in basketball history, attention matters more than people want to admit. Because if you're not attached to a dynasty, or a huge market, or a loud personality, your career can quietly drift out of the spotlight, even if the production never really drops. And that's what happened to Joe Johnson. He was so steady, so reliable, so quietly effective, that his greatness almost blended into the background. He spent some time with the Brooklyn Nets, where he still made countless highlights and game winners. But again, over time, like all the greats, he faded away. But if you really watched him, you remember. You remember the footwork. You remember the calmness. You remember how he could look almost bored while still giving defenders problems all night. Joe Johnson wasn't one of the loudest stars of his era, but for nearly a decade, he was one of the safest bets in the league to give you 20 and make it look effortless. You can still catch him out in the Big Three serving up buckets or on nightcap with Shannon and Ocho. All in all, Joe was one of the best of his era, and that kind of player deserves more respect than history usually gives him, making him our first entrant on the list. Coming in at number 2, Michael Redd. A bucket getter, hidden in a small market. Michael Redd feels like one of those NBA names that lives in a weird space between memory and disappearance. Because if you watched during his prime, you absolutely knew he could hoop. But if you ask a younger fan today, or even a casual fan who only remembers the biggest stars from that era, there's a real chance they don't fully understand how dangerous Michael Redd really was. And that's a shame, because at his best, Michael Redd was not just a good scorer. He was one of the most dangerous offensive guards in the NBA. He spent most of his career in Milwaukee, and that matters, because market size shapes memory more than people admit. Milwaukee at that time wasn't the center of the basketball world. They weren't getting constant national coverage. They weren't driving daily sports debates. So if you weren't really tuned in, it was easy to miss what Redd was doing. But the numbers are still sitting there. And when you go back and really look at them, they hit different. In the 2006 to 2007 season, Michael Redd averaged 26.7 points per game. Not in today's NBA, not in a pace and space environment where 30-point games happen every night. He did that in a different scoring environment, a tougher one. And he did it as the clear number 1 option. No super team, no co-star to ease the pressure, no system designed to hide his weaknesses. He was the offense. That kind of role tells you everything you need to know about how much responsibility he carried. Michael Redd was an elite shooter, left-handed, smooth release, deep range, quick enough to get it off before defenders could really recover. But what made him more dangerous than a lot of people remember was that he wasn't just standing around waiting to shoot. If you closed too hard, he could put it on the floor. If you gave him space, he'd punish you. If you lost him off movement, it was over. He had real offensive gravity, and for a stretch, he carried the weight of an entire offense without getting nearly the amount of praise he probably deserved. That's why it wasn't random when he made the 2008 Olympic Redeem Team. That roster had killers on it, and Michael Redd earned his place. That doesn't happen because of reputation alone. It happens because around the league, people knew exactly how real his game was. But then, like a lot of careers in this category, injuries entered the story. Knee issues. Not the kind that explode into one giant headline, but the kind that slowly pull pieces away from a player's game. A little less burst, a little less rhythm, a little less continuity. And in the NBA, that's all it takes. Because the league doesn't wait for anyone. New stars arrive, new conversations take over, new eras begin. And suddenly a player who once looked like one of the most polished scorers in the league starts becoming a name people only remember halfway. But if you really watched him, you know. Michael Redd was a real bucket. Not hype, not nostalgia exaggeration, just a flat-out offensive problem, whose prime deserved way more spotlight than it got. Coming in at number 3, Danny Granger. There was a stretch in the late 2000s where if you were really watching basketball, you knew Danny Granger was a problem. Not a role player, not a secondary option, but a real number 1. But if you weren't locked in during that time, it's easy to miss just how good he actually was. Because Danny Granger didn't come with noise. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He wasn't constantly trending or dominating headlines. He just produced, night after night. And sometimes, that kind of consistency gets overlooked, especially when it happens in a market like Indiana. Back then, the Pacers weren't driving the national conversation. They weren't the team people were debating every morning. But inside that environment, Danny Granger was carrying real responsibility. In the 2008 to 2009 season, he averaged 25.8 points per game. And that matters, because that wasn't inflated offense. That was real scoring, in a slower, more physical era, against defenses that weren't giving anything away easily. Granger could stretch the floor. He could score from the perimeter, get to the mid-range, and finish when needed. He wasn't the fastest player, but he didn't need to be. His game was built on control, and more importantly, it was built on consistency. And for a while, that was enough to make him one of the most reliable scorers in the league. But then something happened that doesn't always show up clearly in highlight reels. Injuries. Not one dramatic moment, just a gradual shift, a step slower, a little less rhythm, a little more time between games. And while that was happening, the NBA was changing. The pace started picking up. New stars started emerging. New styles started taking over. And without really announcing it, Danny Granger's moment passed. Not because he wasn't good enough anymore, but because timing in the NBA is everything. And once your window shifts, it doesn't always come back. But if you were there, if you watched that stretch live, you remember. You remember that he wasn't just a scorer. He was a legitimate option on a team that depended on him. And for a brief moment in time, Danny Granger was one of the most reliable offensive players in basketball. And while some careers slowly drift out of view, others leave behind something heavier than nostalgia. A feeling that what you saw was only the beginning, and that maybe the best part never had the chance to happen. Coming in at number 4, Brandon Roy. In the NBA, you see some players fade out over time. Some players decline slowly until you realize they're not the same anymore. But Brandon Roy didn't fade. He stopped. And that's what makes his story feel different. Because when you talk about Brandon Roy, you're not just talking about what happened. You're talking about what should have happened. From the moment he entered the league, there was something different about the way he played. He didn't rush. He didn't force anything. He didn't look like he was reacting to the game. He looked like he was controlling it. That kind of composure, especially for a young guard, is rare. And it showed up immediately. By his 3rd season, Brandon Roy was already averaging over 22 points per game. But it wasn't just the scoring. It was the way he played. He could create his own shot. He could facilitate. He could slow the game down and make the right decision without forcing anything. And when you watched him, it felt sustainable. It didn't feel like a hot streak. It felt like the beginning of something long-term, like you were watching a player who was going to be part of the league's top tier for years. But then, reality stepped in. His knees, degenerative issues that don't really go away. And once that started, everything changed. Not all at once, but fast enough that you could feel it slipping. And that's what makes his career so hard to look back on. Because there's no mystery about what he could have been. We already saw it. He was already there. He was already playing at an elite level. And then, it ended. No long run. No gradual decline. Just a reminder that sometimes, even when everything is lined up perfectly, the game doesn't always let it play out the way it should. Not every overlooked career comes with heartbreak, however. Sometimes the numbers are all there. The production is all there. The proof is sitting in plain sight. And somehow, the conversation still moves on. Coming in at number 5, Antawn Jamison. Some careers are loud. Some careers come with headlines, attention, constant discussion. And then there are careers like Antawn Jamison's, productive, consistent, but somehow still under the radar. And when you really sit with it, it doesn't make much sense. Because Jamison scored over 20,000 points in the NBA. Come on now, not 10, not 15. He dropped 20,000. That's not something you casually accomplish. That's not something that happens by accident. That's years of showing up and producing. Jamison wasn't built like the forwards we usually celebrate. He wasn't overpowering defenders with size. He wasn't the most explosive athlete on the floor. But he understood how to score. He had a soft touch and knew how to create with different angles, a rhythm that didn't rely on speed. And that kind of skill ages well, because it doesn't depend on athleticism alone. He produced in Golden State. He balled out in Washington, and even contributed in Cleveland as well. The location changed, but the output stayed the same. But here's the reality. Jamison played in an era filled with dominant forwards. Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Dirk Nowitzki. And when you're sharing space with names like that, it's easy to get pushed into the background. Not because you're not good, but because the spotlight only has room for so many people. And over time, that's what happened. The production stayed, but the conversation moved on. And now, he's one of those players you only fully appreciate when you go back and look at the numbers, because when you do, it becomes clear. Antawn Jamison wasn't just consistent, he was quietly elite for a very long time. And then there are players whose game belonged to a rhythm the league eventually stopped valuing. Not because it stopped working, but because basketball changed around it. And the next player might be one of the clearest examples of that. Coming in at number 6, Al Jefferson. Al Jefferson played the game at a pace that doesn't really exist anymore. And if you didn't watch him during his prime, it's easy to underestimate just how effective he was. Because his game wasn't built for highlights. It wasn't built for fast breaks, or spacing, or three-point shooting. It was built for the block, footwork, patience, control. Once he got the ball in the post, everything slowed down. And that's where he worked. Spin moves, up and unders, and a soft touch around the rim. He didn't rush anything, and defenders knew what was coming, but still struggled to stop it. During his prime, Al Jefferson was consistently putting up around 20 points and 10 rebounds per game. And he did it without relying on pace, without relying on modern spacing, just skill. But the NBA doesn't stay the same. And over time, the league started shifting. Big men were asked to step outside, shoot more, move differently, play in space. And players like Al Jefferson, who dominated in the post, started to feel like they belonged to a different era, not because they lost ability, but because the game moved in a different direction. And that's an important distinction, because Al Jefferson didn't decline because he couldn't play anymore. He declined because the league stopped emphasizing what he did best. And when that happens, players don't always get remembered the way they should. But if you really watched him, you remember how difficult he was to guard. You remember how patient he was. You remember how efficient he could be, without ever rushing the moment. And that kind of game, even if it doesn't fit today's NBA, still deserves respect. Maybe that's what makes basketball memory so strange. It doesn't always hold on to the loudest names. Sometimes, the careers that deserve the most reflection are the ones that happened quietly. The steady scorers, the overlooked stars, the players who gave the game more than they ever got back in attention. Tonight was just a reminder that not every great career gets carried into the future the way it should. Some of them fade into old box scores, old arenas, old memories, in the minds of the people who were really watching. If you enjoyed this one, and you want more calm basketball stories like this, you can like the video, subscribe to the channel, and come back whenever you need a quieter side of the game. This is Factletics, where facts always comes first. Until next time.